Hello and welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to discuss is the financial sacrifices that I've personally made but that you can also make to put yourself in a better financial situation. This is going to be a full series, so I'm going to start this as the introduction video of who I am, why this works, and why you should really care about it. Why is all of this important, and how has all of this actually changed my life? What is the real tangible impact? If for whatever reason you already trust me, you already know this works, and you just want to know the steps, I will link the next video in the description below, but for everyone else, let's get into it. Alright, let's get into it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zach. I am currently 30 years old, but even by the time I was 27 years old, so a few years back at this point, I was completely debt-free other than the mortgage on my house. So literally, other than financing the house I live in, I had no other debts until I financed my dream car. And even now today, that statement is still true. The only debt I have is the mortgage for this house. All my vehicles are paid off, no credit card debt, no student loans, everything else is paid off. And I want to make this clear, I didn't get to where I am by making an exorbitant amount of money. For example, when I bought my dream car, that was 2019, I made just over $75,000. It was like $75,300 that year. That is the most money I had ever made in a year, but you also have to keep in mind my student loan payments were $12,000 minimum per year. Now, by comparison, I know people who have gone into like the trades or the construction industries, they have none of the student loan debt, and they still have salaries that are either at that point or higher. So I'm not going to debate over whether or not $75,000 is an astronomically high income. I think it's very achievable, but the point is that is the most money I had ever made in a year, and in all prior years the number was even less than that, and I was still able to get to that point where I had no debts and where everything was paid off. So I didn't go with any of those like crazy Amazon distribution schemes online. I'm not going to sell you some ridiculous course. I also didn't make any crazy and risky investments that happened to get lucky and pay off. This is really just an achievable salary and kind of buckling down and doing the work, and you can still get really good results, and that's what I want to make clear here. This was really just taking the money that I had and using it in a more responsible way, thereby allowing me to have a much higher quality of life. So that's what I want to make clear is you don't have to do these crazy, ridiculous get-rich-quick schemes. All you have to do is take the income you have and be a lot smarter with it, and you can still get to that same place, and that is exactly what I did, and that's exactly what I want to teach within this series. So here's how this has changed my life, okay? In my early to mid-20s, 23, 24 even, I was pretty much living paycheck to paycheck. I had a ton of debt, specifically student loans. And over the course of like 3 to 5 years, I paid off 100% of that debt and bought my house and then bought my dream car on top of it. So I've got another video that I've linked in the description below where I talk about budgeting and kind of the importance of it. So what I did is I set really strict budgets for myself, then I made the sacrifices that I'm going to talk about in this series to hit those really stringent budgets. Then I took all the money that I collectively saved in all these categories by actually adhering to these budgets, put 100% of that money towards my loans and towards the debts that I had, and then collectively it reduced my minimum monthly payment as well as how much money I was losing long-term to compounding interest. If you don't know what compound interest is or the importance of it, I've done another video on that. I'll link that in the description below as well. But compound interest is really why this whole thing matters and why this whole thing works. And the whole premise is that you save yourself more money or earn yourself more money long-term by investing as much as possible as early as possible. So on one hand, you don't need to know the math behind it, but understanding it will probably help motivate you to achieve the sacrifices that we're going to discuss. But that's what it boils down to, right? Is in 3 to 5 years, I went from paycheck to paycheck to living a life that maybe isn't extravagant, isn't really eccentric, but it's comfortable. It's financially comfortable, and I can afford the things I need to survive, and then on occasion, I have enough money to buy the things that I really want. Most notably among them is my personal dream car, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is my 2004 Dodge Viper, which I have several videos of on this channel, but now I've kind of crashed it, so I had to refilm this as a result of that. But really the point I'm making here is doing the things that I'm going to discuss gets you into a position where you can make purchases like that or pursue things that have been your lifelong dream that you weren't otherwise able to afford. That's really how big of an impact this can have, how empowering it can be, and how much it can enable you to do. So really, I would not be where I am and I would not have any of the things I have if I didn't have the budgeting coping skills that I have, and I didn't make the sacrifices that I'm going to discuss in the series. That's literally all it comes down to. So that said, the budgeting aspect is critical to this. So if you haven't seen that video, if you don't know what you're doing from a budgeting perspective, please check that out. That is something you absolutely need to do for this to matter. And then this series is the sacrifices that were made to hit those really aggressive budgets, and then how it affects you on the day-to-day, the week-to-week, the month-to-month, and so on. Now, the other thing to know about me is beyond just being financially conscious in my personal life, it is also a big part of my professional life, right? So this isn't just some guy talking to a camera in his office that's going to be posted on the internet with nothing to back it up. These are actual techniques and things that I do like on a professional level for a multi-billion-dollar company. And quite frankly, because I do it in my personal life, I'm quite good at it. And in the last couple of years, my career has really taken off as a result of that. But one thing I've noticed on the professional side of doing stuff like this is something that I call the 50-80 rule, which isn't like a hard set rule. It's just something I kind of roughly developed. But that is that you get something like 80% of the total cost savings with about 50% of the effort. So this series is going to go from easiest sacrifices to hardest sacrifices to make. And really, however many of these sacrifices that you either want to make or need to make to survive, that's really up to you. So the level of effort, that is completely your call, but I'm going to tell you everything I did. Just know the more you save, it just takes exponentially more effort to get a smaller and smaller and smaller piece of the pie as you get to like the most ideal scenario possible. But if that's the difference of whether or not you can afford food or whether or not you can afford to heat your house or keep the lights on, by all means, you probably have to put in that effort. So really, that's the point I was at when I was check to check, right? I had to make those decisions and I had to do this to be able to get by and to literally survive. But in my case, just so you guys know that I'm not just kind of arbitrarily saying this, when I was at my first job out of college, when I still had a lot of student loan debt from putting myself through school, even on an entry-level engineer's salary, even when I paid my bare minimum expenses, when I was living with someone else, for splitting utilities or splitting rent, my bare minimum payment on student loans, I had $25 a week left over to live off of. So in my situation, $25 a week to try to survive off of is not a lot of money. Now that $25 was after groceries and after utilities, right? That was what was left over. That's not a lot of wiggle room. If anything in your life goes wrong and you have $25 a week left over, I don't think I have to tell you this. You know how much that hurts in the event that anything unexpected comes up. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of these are not fun. They suck. But realize that you're making the sacrifices now to have a substantially better quality of life within a couple year time frame. That's what you have to remember, is this is the long game. Like I said, I now own a house. I now bought my dream car. Having these things be possible now within a few years time frame, that is why you're making these sacrifices. But that's the bright side, right? You do these things for a while and then you build up a financial buffer, and then you get to the point that you don't have to do them anymore, that you've clawed your way out, you have a safety net, and then you're at a point that you can afford to slowly pare back, that you can afford to comfortably get rid of these sacrifices and still have an excellent quality of life. So as someone who's been there and experienced that, that's why I'm posting this series, right? This is how I clawed my way out of that position, because that was literally the difference of whether or not I could afford groceries. That was the difference of if I could survive and afford the roof over my head. I want to help others get out of the position that I was in, because the cost of living and the cost of inflation is going up substantially. It's debilitating to so many people, and I want to help people get out of the situation where they're no longer able to afford the things they need. Back when I wrote this, the latest data that was available showed that in March of 2022, 64% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. And in fact, 48% of households making more than $100,000 per year were still living paycheck to paycheck. But as inflation rises, as the cost of living rises, I expect those numbers to get worse. So by me putting my knowledge of what I did, of how I clawed my way out of that scenario, that could be the difference of whether or not a family is living check to check, or whether or not they have food on their table, or whether or not they can afford medical care for their kids. I think this is information that could really help a lot of people, and that's why I want it to be readily available, and that is also why I refuse to charge for it. I wish something like that was out there when I was doing this and when I was going through this. So this is my way of trying to do the best I can to prevent other people from being trapped in that same way. So like I said, some of these are not going to be fun, but I want you to keep in mind, you can do it. If I could figure this out, you can absolutely do it as well. But just realize, nobody is going to be sitting there forcing you to adhere to these things, right? This is all about self-discipline. You have to push yourself to do it. You have to stay in the habits of this because there isn't going to be somebody there just guiding you and forcing you into a specific lifestyle. So it's really dependent on your own free will to make sure that you're doing the right things. If you lack the discipline to keep going, at some point you're going to revert back to your old habits, and especially if they were really detrimental habits, you're going to put yourself back in the same scenario, and that's not what you want. With all that in mind, the big theme of this whole series is getting the most out of your money. How do you get more for your money? How do you make the same amount of money go further? Or how do you get the same essentials to survive but pay less money for them? We're gonna start with the easy ones. We're gonna work up to the more sacrificial ones. But anyhow, that's who I am. That's my financial background. That's why I'm making this series. If you like saving money or if you like sports cars, please consider subscribing to the channel. Or if you like, comment, or share this with somebody else who might find it useful, that also helps the channel grow. And really what that does is boost the likelihood that this kind of content gets put in front of new people, thereby helping others as well. That's all I've got for the introduction, but I want to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time.